Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we're talking about one teen's quest to learn more about World War II and the Veterans Breakfast Club, a national nonprofit dedicated to connecting veterans and providing a space for them to share their stories. Joining us is Trey Burman, local to Annapolis and a student at the Key School, and a history buff and model builder. Thank you so much, Trey, for joining me today.
Thanks for letting me be here. It's a pleasure to be with wonderful people, and it's a pleasure to teach people about history.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to dive into our conversation. To our viewers and listeners, this episode is recorded, so we won't be taking live questions, but we still love to hear your questions and comments, so feel free to send them our way. So Trey, let's get started. First, I wanted just to ask, what made you interested in World War II? What was sort of the spark that inspired you?
It's actually pretty boring. There was really no spark. I actually started learning about World War II back when I was like one, because I hung around the Naval Academy all the time and here in Annapolis. My dad works at the academy. He's one of the sailing coaches for the dinghy team. So I kind of just grew up around history. And my grandfather and my great grandfather both served in the military. My great grandfather on my mom's side was a Liberty ship, well, somewhat of a Liberty ship. Not a merchant marine, but he was Navy, and he served on the USS Polaris, which is a Arctic refrigerator ship, and he was a gunner on the ship, so he served a 5-inch gun.
Wow.
And the Polaris got a couple citations during the war, actually, for doing a couple very interesting things with the gun that I definitely encourage everybody watching this to view and look up themselves, because it's very interesting what they did. And my grandfather was stationed in San Francisco during the Korean War in what he calls the Battle of San Francisco, because they basically fortified the crap out of San Francisco, and so that the North Koreans and the Chinese wouldn't fly bombers over and nuke to San Francisco. So he actually served on a Bofors 40 millimeter quad gun mount in anti-aircraft gun mount in San Francisco. And he dealt with POWs, and he dealt with gunnery practices, and he was actually there. I think he was there. It's kind of overshadowed because there was one before that, that was really famous, but he was actually involved in some of the incidents with phantom bombers, where people in San Francisco would like see bombers, or radars would pick up bombers, so all the anti-aircraft guns would just open up, and they weren't there. They were gone. They were like weather balloons. A lot of people, there's actually conspiracy theories about them, that they were aliens, of course. And it's actually one of the great mysteries of just military, the US military, is throughout the World War II in Korea, what were these phantom bombers doing? Because they immediately just dispersed after Korea. So nobody knows what they were, but a lot of people think they were like birds or weather balloons.
So crazy. Well, it's so clear that you absolutely just love history. How did you decide to sort of take it to the next level and get involved with veterans? And then could you tell us a little bit about the Veterans Breakfast Club? What is it, and how did you find them?
So one day I was just sitting on my couch, right? And my mom comes up to me and she says, "Hey Trey, we got a meeting with a World War II P-51 Mustang pilot. It's a fighter pilot." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll get on the meeting." My grandpa's going to be there. My grandpa on my mom's side, that I call Pop, is going to be there. So I'm like, "All right, I'm going to join." And I join, and I immediately see, oh Lord, it's Bud Anderson, which is like, Bud Anderson is like the ace of aces nowadays. He's an incredibly talented pilot. He is incredible individual. And I was like, man, this guy's like done stuff. It's not, again, not to like rain on anybody's parade or any veterans parade, but there's kind of a difference between like shooting down 15 airplanes and sitting in a logistics center all day. Not saying that logistics were a bad part of World War II, or not an important part. They were probably one of the most important parts. The entire doctrine was based off of logistics. The reason battles happened was because of logistics, but people it's harder to write a book, or it's
Right.
harder to write a TV
Right.
show
He's a
about that
celebrity.
than a pirate pilot. Yeah, he's a celebrity. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna keep attending these meetings because they have important people on them, and they have interesting people on them. And eventually, I kind of just got drawn to like the people in the meetings, the people I've met around the meetings. A lot of veterans show up, a lot of military historians show up, a lot of friends show up. Just now, I actually had a meeting recently with Robert Ballard's nephew. The Robert Ballard's the guy who studied Titanic, and he was or discovered Titanic, and he was one of the and his nephew is a naval historian, and he focuses on the Guadalcanal naval campaigns, which is one of the things I know a lot about. I've studied that pretty extensively. I dedicated a year to it about. So yeah, I've kind of just like just this year, kind of over the summer, just focused on this. Focused on talking with veterans, focused on just getting into this more, because it was an on and off interest throughout my entire life. It was something I had in the background. And recently it's been like, all right, so these people are dying out. These people are not going to be here for much longer. And there's very interesting people. And we got to tell their stories, because they're not going to be able to tell it for themselves for very much longer. Because, and again, with the modern day, people are forgetting these stories, and sadly, and a lot of people are making up their own stories, and a lot of people are stereotyping vehicles, people falsely. And we got to actually hear from the veterans while they're still here. So that's what I'm doing. I use it to formulate opinions on different vehicles, different equipment, different people, different generals, strategies, battles, tactics, what was important, what wasn't important. I use the veterans themselves to kind of filter all that out and say, all right, so what's the stuff that I need to keep top, and what's the stuff that I can kind of filter down, and also learn a couple things. And leading to the next question, what is the Veterans Breakfast Club? You can find us anywhere online. You can join us on Zoom. We run YouTube streams, and it's basically this nonprofit organization where we get veterans from World War II to modern day on, and as long as you have a story to tell, you're allowed. Even if you don't have a story to tell, you're allowed on the meetings. All right, I'm allowed on the meetings. Sometimes you get featured, sometimes you won't. We have 3 teenagers who usually attend meetings. I'm along with Henry Shepke. He's down in the South somewhere, and Connor Ritchie. They're very interesting people. Henry has a stamp collection, I think, of all the veterans, and Connor interviews veterans, and he's interviewed about like 22, I think, at this point, and they're both very interesting. So I suggest, I'm not the only person. There's 2 others. They're amazing. They're probably better than me at this. But yeah, it's just something that people do. A lot of veterans show up. We have a fun time. We chat sometimes. One time, actually, during when we had Gary Powers' son on, the guy who got shot down in 1950 over the 1950-1960s over Soviet Union, which caused a fairly big stir, and they made a movie, I think, starring Tom Hanks in it about that entire thing, Bridge of Spies. And we were talking to his son, and he was late because he had to deal with something that came up. So we just talked about the Cold War and like doctrine about the Cold War and espionage during the Cold War up until that point, and we just had a discussion with that. So sometimes we'll have discussions, sometimes we'll have stories. We usually have time to answer questions. The only time we've been a bit rushed to answer questions is during the longer ones, the ones where people have more of a story to tell, like the one that we did on Iwo Jima with the only remaining World War II Medal of Honor recipient.
Wow.
That was cool. And
cool.
It just show up.
So how often do you meet?
Usually we meet, they run programs pretty frequently. I think the World War II, they'll say when they have a World War II roundtable, which is the meetings that I usually attend the most,
Mhm,
They sometimes have special events. The World War II roundtables are like the fourth Thursday every month. They're monthly.
mhm, mhm.
And sometimes they have different things. They have like happy hours that we do. And basically we all just show up and just have a good time and talk about the military. It used to actually be a Pittsburgh local thing in Pittsburgh,
Oh,
Pennsylvania, which is where it was started.
uh-huh.
And it's kind of spread out to be with COVID. Actually, it's one of the things that COVID's done better for. They had to go to meetings and people could attend the meetings
Yeah,
and
that's
they could
great.
ask questions and they could be more interactive. We also
Uh-huh.
do YouTube and Facebook live streams if you want to find us there, but I suggest joining the meetings because then you get everything. The YouTube streams are cool. It's just you might not get your questions answered.
Yeah,
uh,
that's really fascinating. I love that you're able to interact so much and that COVID has allowed this to become nationwide and a little bit more accessible to everyone. And it sounds like you're able to really ask questions and dive in and to interact with different veterans. Do you feel like you've learned anything surprising?
oh, definitely. How can you not? You're talking with legends here. We're talking with people who have gone above the call of duty.
Mhm, mhm.
We are talking with pilots. We're talking with Navy men. We're talking with historians. Even have surprising stories. We have one of my most surprising stories that I was learning about when we were talking about this was actually that Gary Powers was shot down while he was investigating a nuclear disaster,
Wow.
the Kishitim disaster. He was shot down near Kishitim, and the nuclear power or the nuclear reprocessing site in Kishitim had just blown up a couple years earlier. So we were flying a mission over there to see where it was, what was happening. We have laws that say if you have a disaster, you have to disclose it. Nuclear disaster from the IAEA, which is the thing that shows nuclear power nowadays. But back then, we had to fly spy planes over to see what exactly the Soviets are doing with nuclear technology. And that was the reason Gary Powers got shot down. He got shot down right, I think, a couple miles past Kishitim. It was real close.
That's
So
pretty
that's one of the
crazy.
surprising things I've learned. Another surprising thing is the German jets in World War II. There were a lot of pilots. Like a lot of the pilots actually saw them. A lot more pilots than you would think.
Really?
The German World War II jet program is the first fighter jets that they ever made, the Me-262 Schwalbe, and it was considered to be an excellent fighter jet. It just never was made. It was barely
Huh.
made in any substantial numbers, but a lot of them were sent up in the late war by a lot of these pilots, or to face a lot of these pilots. It's just they would always run away since since the German pilots weren't super trained at that
Hmm,
time of the war.
hmm.
That's another reason. That's another interesting thing I've known. But yeah, if you attend a meeting, I guarantee you will learn something that you haven't. Heck, even on the meeting that they did about the teenagers, where the veterans would ask the teenagers questions and the teenagers could ask the veterans questions, I learned things. on
Oh,
my on the one centered around on me and then the other two,
that's
I
so
learned
funny.
things about the Starlight Scope, which was the first night vision sniper scope in the U.S. military during Vietnam.
Wow. Very cool.
Um,
Is there
so
anything
you'll
that's
learn things.
been hard about talking to veterans? Anything that you found is challenging, either talking to them or listening to the stories?
Definitely. Not necessarily for me, but I definitely do know that most people who aren't as involved with me in history as me in history and not as neutral about it as I am,
Hmm.
I tend to just not form that many opinions about things that before I talk to veterans. I usually form them after I talk to the veterans about them,
Hmm.
so I can just get their opinion on it.
Hmm.
But for people who are less educated in history, they won't know what we're talking about most of the time. Like
Hmm.
we're talking about cruiser formations. We're talking about bomber boxes, stuff
Hmm.
stuff that like the normal person doesn't know about. We're talking about We're talking about like specific battlefield like conditions and specific things that only really a military person or someone who's studied the military for a while will know. But I don't think that prohibits anybody from having a fun time if they don't know what it is, because it's fun, and it's also, you can just look it up while the meeting's going on. You're like, oh, this is this, this is this. Sometimes we'll actually do things where veterans have to do their homework, where we tell them to watch a movie or read a book, and then we come back and we talk about that book or that movie. One we did was the 1944 movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, written after a book written by an actual Doolittle Raider, which was a secret surprise raid over Japan in the early stages of World War II, which really gave the Americans the morale to go forward. And we talked about it, and we were talking about how they could have made this movie during the wartime. It was released in 1944. And the way they did it, they had like Japanese American actors, they had the actual military technology, they had sets, they had a lot of different things. They actually took recordings of like a plane flying out of a military base, and then used that as like part of their movie, like a legitimate, like just random plane going at the military base. And that's why you don't really see a lot of consistency in that movie, because they're when they're filming the B-25 Mitchells, which are the bombers involved, they're filming, like a lot of them are later war Mitchells. A lot of them are later war, and the Mitchell was one of the planes that changed drastically throughout the war. It went from a medium bomber to a ground attack aircraft with a lot of rockets and machine guns on it, so it could take out tanks. So you'll see a lot of inconsistencies there,
I can
and
see
only a
how
real historical person would see that.
Yeah. I can see how going into these meetings, you would definitely want to have an open mind, just to be able to listen to the stories and sort of absorb them. And I could see how doing some homework is certainly helpful. But it sounds like even if you don't know a lot about history, the stories are so riveting and so exciting. You know,
Oh,
you
yeah,
could
definitely
still jump in and learn something. So one of my questions for you is, what is your plan with this project and this idea of going to all these breakfast clubs? What are you hoping to gain from it, and how do you want to get others involved?
Well, I just want to join the meetings. I guess it's more of something where I just do to, you know, get more knowledgeable at history and have fun. But I do want to get more people involved. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm doing a lot of other press interviews. I have one with the Baltimore Post. I think a Baltimore Post. I don't know exactly which post it is. I haven't gotten as many details about it yet, but I'm doing that soon. And I want to do this so I can connect with the veterans before they're gone, because they're going to be gone soon. It's
Right.
quite a startling thing. People think, yeah, World War II veterans have a bit of time. They don't. Even Vietnam veterans don't have that much time.
Right.
And
Right.
that's why we need to connect with their stories.
So why
And
do you think other kids should get involved, and sort of what is your goal in terms of getting more, whether it be teenagers or even younger kids involved? What are you hoping to achieve through that?
I want people to view these different battles, these different tanks, these different guns, these different everything, right, from a battlefield perspective and not a historian perspective, because it's really easy to kind of get caught up in, was this a significant battle historically, or was this a piece of equipment historically from a historian perspective, and hindsight is 2020 vision. But not a lot of people know, like, how did it manifest on the field? Like a good example is actually a model I have right behind me on that middle shelf that I'm pointing to right there, a Tiger tank, which has been hotly debated recently. I don't look up any opinionated source. It's either going to be one extreme or the other. People saying this was the best tank of World War II, or people saying it was a piece of garbage. And it's hard to find people who have encountered Tigers, because only 1,000 of them were ever made. It was a very, very dangerous tank. It had a very powerful gun and a very thick armor. But what did the veterans think of this perpetual debate versus the German Tiger or the American Sherman? It's always there, and everybody's always super divided about it until they actually talk with veterans, and then the veterans say, I've never encountered a tiger, but Shermans weren't that bad, which is a large thing, which is, again, one of the things that I always pull up whenever somebody argues with me about history is, this veteran's probably talked to me about it. I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna like rack my brain, find the memory. I'm gonna say, this veteran, this guy's name, said this, and here's the YouTube link so that you can go look it up.
It is.
Not that I get in very many arguments, though. Usually I kind of just keep to myself and try to get people to join the meetings. It never works, though.
It is so cool, though, in terms of thinking about history and the ways that we study history, that you really are able to experience history firsthand, and you're hearing firsthand accounts, and having those primary sources is such a rare thing. And so I can see how this is so exciting on multiple levels, not only just the stories and the ideas of like, oh, comparing, weapons or equipment, but also the idea that, look, I'm really getting a firsthand experience with a slice of history.
Yes, definitely.
And history, when think about wars that are really big and epic in the truest sense of the word, here you are actually getting to hear this firsthand account, which I think sounds really powerful. Do you see any similarities between you and the veterans that you're talking to, or do you feel like you are talking to someone from a completely different world, that it's more like learning from afar?
Oh, definitely. I connect with veterans all the time. I mean, they're people as well. And usually we connect over like a love for something. A lot of veterans I know, a lot of veterans I've talked to are avid model builders. They build models like me. You can see a couple models back there. And we can talk about like, oh, what are the models that you're building right now, or what are the cool modeling paints? And it's neat because I can see a little bit of me, like me and my friends, in these 90-year-old people who went through literal hell and back to save our country from annihilation, basically.
Yeah.
Which is very, very, it's humbling almost. We're like, man, these people were there, right?
Right. So what do you think their reaction is to you? How do the veterans react to you and the other students that are coming to the meetings?
Well, there's usually 3 ways veterans react to me, and it depends on the surrounding. Usually if it's a veterans breakfast club, people will actually introduce me or say hi to me, like, oh, hey, Trey, how's it going, right? And the veterans will usually know. The incoming veterans are like, yeah, he's pretty cool. A couple of veterans I know definitely have thought Call of Duty kid before actually speaking to me. People who've heard of World War II from like Call of Duty, Saving Private Ryan, don't know anything about it. They're like, man, this guy beat up Nazis. And it's like, it's weird because a lot of people ask like very almost self-answering questions. Like the one I hear most is, in most video games, you can pick up your enemy's weapon after you kill them. I hear a lot of, did you pick up an enemy weapon in World War II? It's like, no, because they were halfway across the battlefield. I'm not going to run to them, right?
Right.
Or I'm in a tank. I'm not going to get out of my tank to grab a gun.
Right. Everyone's firsthand experience, or their idea of what war is based on a video game, versus veterans are like, no, that is not what it's like at all. Really interesting.
It's a lot more coordinated than running around on a virtual map shooting people,
right,
and screaming at them when you die.
Right.
It's a lot more of, you're in a division, you're in a box, you're supposed to sit there, wait until you find the enemy, and when the enemy rounds the corner, you go bam bam. And it's a lot slower than a lot of people think.
Yeah.
Of course, there are large, fast-paced engagements, but they very rarely happen.
Right. So what about advice that you have maybe to other kids who have a passion, like so clearly you are passionate about history, but they don't feel like they're getting the resources they need to fulfill it? So you stumbled across this breakfast club, and it's clearly been an exciting journey. What would you recommend to other kids who are looking for outlets for a passion?
Number one, just join the club. I've said it, find it, veteransbreakfastclub.com is the thing. Find the veterans, find the club, find a historical association near you, go to museums. The Smithsonian's are somewhat, I think they're free. They have a World War II exhibit, they have a US war exhibit. Dulles is free. That's up near
Yep,
Dulles
Boudoir
Airport. They have the Uber
Hazy.
Hazy, yeah.
Yep.
A good thing if you're down south anytime, they're opening an armor and cavalry division museum in Georgia somewhere. And they have a lot of neat vehicles, that like one-of-a-kind vehicles that they've restored there. You can go online, look at YouTube videos. There's a lot of good YouTube videos. A good example of a historical YouTuber that I like is The Chieftain. He does this series named Inside the Hatch, where he goes around a lot of World War II armored vehicles and from the crew perspective instead of the historian perspective, and says, hey, this tank has been seen in a lot of different annals of history by 2020 vision, historical vision. What was it like for the crew when their tank was on fire and they had to escape? And so that's a good YouTuber to watch. Again, look documentaries, find good ones, find consistent ones, fact check everything these days. You can never find an unbiased documentary. You can never find a fully truthful documentary. Just fact check everything over multiple sources. I have a 5 sources rule that I usually do, where 1 is an extreme one opinion, 1 is a moderate one opinion, 1's in the middle, such as a document, like a spreadsheet of like victories or losses by this general. 1 is like sort of toward another division and decision or opinion, and 1 is very toward that other opinion. So I do 1 from varying from, let's say I don't know, Star Wars or Star Trek. Just an example. Star Trek, like fanboy basically. Star Trek, somebody who enjoys it. Basic spreadsheets of how many like Star Trek movies and Star Wars movies people have watched, or like the numbers from the box office. And then Star Wars person, Star Wars fanboy, right? So I can get an extreme view, somewhat opinionated view, normal view, somewhat opinionated view, and then another extreme view. So I can kind of formulate my opinion based on that. So I can fact check between all 5.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's
it
what I
sounds
usually do.
like you've had a lot of experience thinking about biases and sources and what's true and what's a fabrication, or what is something that is entrenched in opinion versus something that is really just looking more at the facts and the numbers, which it sounds like there's also just so many great life lessons in what you've learned, because these are all things that you can apply every day in your life as you're going through and encountering news or whatever. Really valuable skills. And I think some of your advice to other people who are feeling like their passions aren't being fulfilled, of exploring and looking up, different videos and exploring online to see what's offered. I love your suggestion of trying to join like-minded people in talking about what you love, which is what you found, and in such an incredible capacity with talking to real veterans. Well, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you, Trey Burman, for joining me today. Also, thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in both video and podcast format. We'll make sure that we put up a few of Trey's links so that you can learn more about the Veterans Breakfast
Join
Club.
the Veterans Breakfast Club. I do it. We need more people. That we don't have much time.
And I love it.
Thanks for having me.
And connect to people who are passionate like Trey. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.
Thank you.